Way back in February 2020, right when the world was first trying to figure out what was going on with this new virus, a scientific paper dropped that made a really explosive claim about where it came from. So today, we're going to break down that exact paper and the super controversial theory it put forward. All right, let's just jump right in. Right there in the abstract, the author, Jean-Claude Perez, he doesn't beat around the bush at all. He claims he has, and I quote, formal proof that the virus is partially synthetic. I mean, wow. That one sentence alone just kicked off a huge debate. So the big question is, how on earth did he get to such a wild conclusion?
So this is the paper that's at the heart of it all. It's called Wuhan COVID-19 Synthetic Origins and Evolution. And the author, Jean-Claude Perez, his whole goal was to see if he could find some kind of strategy, a plan behind how this virus was evolving.
His whole investigation kicked off with this phylogenetic tree. And if you're not familiar, just think of it like a family tree, but for viruses. He looked at 9 different SARS genomes, starting from the very first outbreaks back in 2003 and going all the way up to the Wuhan strain. He was basically hunting for anything weird, any unusual patterns, or what he called an evolutionary strategy.
Okay, so to build his case that this thing was synthetic, the author hones in on 2 main lines of evidence. He actually calls them clues in the paper. So let's walk through them one by one, just like a detective story.
All right, let's get into the first clue. And honestly, this one is a bombshell. The author claims he found little pieces, genetic fragments, from another very famous virus, just sitting right there, embedded inside the COVID-19 genome.
So what he did was he zoomed in on this one tiny little section of the genome. We're talking just 300 base pairs, which are like the letters of the genetic code. And in that little tiny spot, he says he found a really high, kind of suspicious concentration of code from HIV, the virus that causes AIDS, and also from SIV, which is basically the monkey version of it.
Now for the author, the important part wasn't just that the fragments were there. It was how they were arranged. He looked at it and didn't see something random that nature would cook up. Instead, he saw what he calls logic and symmetries. Things that, in his view, are the clear signs of deliberate, human-like organization.
Okay, so that was clue number 1. Now, clue number 2, this is where things get really interesting, because we're going to shift gears from biology and head straight into the world of mathematics. The author claims he found a hidden code, like a hidden mathematical pattern that seems to be running the show, governing the virus's entire structure.
So to get what he's talking about, we have to quickly understand this idea of a stationary wave. The easiest way to think about it is like a guitar string. When you pluck it, the string vibrates like crazy, but the shape of that wave it creates kind of stays in the same place, right? Well, the author used a similar mathematical idea on the virus's genome. He was looking for these repeating mathematical patterns, or resonances, almost like the genome was humming with a kind of structural harmony.
So how did he do it? Well, first, he took the entire genetic code and chopped it up into blocks of different sizes. Then, he ran this mathematical analysis on all those blocks, searching for those moments of harmony, those resonances. But here's the crucial part. He wasn't just looking for any pattern. He was specifically looking for resonances that lined up with Fibonacci numbers. That famous sequence, right? Where each number is the sum of the 2 before it, 5, 8, 13, and so on. And this shows you exactly what he found. So for the original SARS virus from back in 2003, when he ran his analysis for the Fibonacci number 5, he got this really clear, repeating, resonant pattern. He calls this wave on. But then, when he ran the same exact analysis for the next Fibonacci number, 8, the pattern just looks like chaos. It's totally dissonant. So that wave is off.
Okay, but here's where the plot really thickens. The author claims this pattern isn't a one-off thing. It actually changes over time. I mean, finding one wave that's on could just be a fluke, right? A coincidence. So he took the same analysis and applied it to all the other SARS genomes he had collected over the years.
And this is what he says he found. According to his work, for about 10 years, from 2003 to 2012, only that wave for the number 5 was on. Everything else was off. But then, in 2015, something big happened. Suddenly, the waves for 8 and 13 also switched on. This suggests the virus's structure had become way more complex, mathematically speaking, and that new, more organized pattern was still there in the sample from 2017.
So, what does all this increasing mathematical complexity actually mean? Well, the author puts forward a pretty bold hypothesis. He says this is not just random noise. He suggests that this growing organization is actually a sign of an evolutionary strategy, a way for the virus to make itself more stable,
more coherent, and in the end, a much better adapted virus for infecting humans.
Okay, so let's bring it all together. How do these two completely different clues, on one hand, these supposed HIV fragments, and on the other, this hidden Fibonacci code, how do they come together to support the paper's huge claim?
Let's put them side by side. Clue number 1. You've got these little genetic fragments packed into a small area, which he interprets as looking like non-natural logic and symmetry. Then you have clue number 2. This mathematical pattern across the entire genome that seems to get more and more complex over the years, which he interprets as a deliberate strategy for adapting to humans.
And this is really the core of his argument. The author takes these two separate threads and weaves them together to build his case. He's basically saying that when you combine these seemingly artificial elements with a clear pattern of increasing mathematical organization, it points away from a random act of nature and points towards, as he puts it, the mark of a desire for organization of a human nature. In other words, he's arguing it has a synthetic origin.
And that leaves us with the massive question that this paper puts on the table. Are these findings proof of a hidden mathematical blueprint, a fingerprint of some kind of unnatural manipulation? Or are they just a series of really complex but totally natural coincidences that you find when you go looking for a very specific pattern? And that, right there, is the controversy at the heart of the Perez paper.